The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask is a game that I find myself thinking about a lot. Nintendo games have this reputation for being these family-friendly, happy-go-lucky games, but Majora's Mask is the antithesis of that in a lot of ways. Not that having a lighter tone is a bad thing, but the approach this game takes makes it stand out from Nintendo's other offerings. The game is steeped in this overwhelming feeling of dread and melancholy. It's a game about the literal end of the world, and the effect it has on its inhabitants. I often credit Majora's Mask as my favorite Zelda game, and that's mostly due to how often I find myself thinking about it and its themes in my day-to-day life. It was one of the first few I played when getting into the series, right off the heels of both Skyward Sword and Ocarina of Time, and even when playing it as a kid, I could tell there was something different about this game that made it stand out from the others. While I couldn't tell you what it was back then, after having replayed it a couple dozen times over the years, I think now I have a clearer idea of what makes the game so special in my eyes. Not only does the game feature some of my favorite dungeons and set pieces in the entire series, but I've come to really appreciate the intricate world of Majora's Mask. The way the narrative's themes and characters interact with the gameplay is honestly really fascinating, and a large contributor to that is this game's unique structure. Part of what makes Majora's Mask so special even in the context of the rest of the Zelda series is its unique game structure. Instead of being this linear adventure like most Zelda games, Majora's Mask takes place over a 3-day period, where over the course of those 3 days the moon is visibly descending closer and closer to the ground. While there are ways to slow down or speed up time, there's no way to outright freeze it, and being able to look up and see the embodiment of my nightmares descending ever closer no matter where you are in the game acts as a constant, chilling reminder that death is approaching, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. The only way to avoid certain doom is to travel back in time and reset the 3-day cycle, at the cost of losing any progress you made on top of most of your items. While some things like key items will stay with you, for the most part it's back to square one every time you reset, which I think is a really fascinating concept. There's only 4 main areas in this game, a pretty low number for Zelda standards, but in exchange there's a greater focus on the side content and the colorful cast of characters that inhabit this world. Each one has their own schedules and routines, some of which need to be worked around in order to progress the main and side quests. Most in-game events will only occur once per cycle, and completing them, or not completing them in a timely manner, can determine what other events you have access to on later days. In a lot of ways, this makes the whole game feel like a giant puzzle. While there are some soft checkpoints that allow you to speed up certain things on repeat cycles, I think it's really neat that the game forces you to plan ahead if you want to get as much done as possible in one go. You're able to track different quests and character schedules in the Bomber's Notebook, unless you're like me and forget it exists until halfway through the game. Look, I might be a little stupid, please don't judge me. The game becomes this balancing act of bouncing between different objectives, and if you're like me and you like to push your luck just a little too much, it can result in some really tense situations where you only have minutes left on the endgame clock. To give you a little bit of an idea of how effective this structure is, let's take a quick look at the first cycle of the game. This is one of my favorite openings in any video game, as I think it does a great job of both selling this game's premise and introducing you to the game's central gameplay loop in a digestible and easy to understand manner. This introductory cycle sees Link stuck as a Deku Scrub, and the guards won't let you leave town because the field area is considered too dangerous without protection, so you're confined to the clock town for its entire duration. In order to get turned back into a human, you need to retrieve your ocarina that was stolen by the Skull Kid, but it's not immediately obvious how you're supposed to go about that. So you do the only thing you really can do and start walking around town, talking to the people around you in order to find any inkling of guidance. This cycle is interesting in the way that you don't really have to do a whole lot in order to progress at the end. The only thing you're outright required to do is find a lost fairy and return it to the fountain to gain magic snot bubbles, and then find a moon's tear so you can access the clock tower through this flower on the 3rd day. But other than that, you're pretty much on your own for the rest of the time. An unaltered cycle will last around an hour in real time, and you'll quickly find there's not a whole lot you can do when confined to just Clocktown. That's not to say there isn't anything you can do. There's a handful of small side quests you can partake in to nab a few heart pieces, and there's plenty of people to talk to around town. But because you're confined to such a small area, you'll eventually run out of things to do, and you'll be stuck biding your time as you watch the moon slowly creep closer and closer towards the ground. This is a really effective way to put the player into the shoes of the citizens of Termina. You're forced to basically sit there, and really take in the fact that this might be the end when the moon inevitably falls down. The types of conversations you can have with people will change from day to day, and as the moon gets closer and closer, people will visibly get more anxious and fearful, openly having arguments over whether or not they should abandon the preparation for the upcoming Carnival of Time and seek shelter, while some denied the moon is even falling in the first place to feign this false sense of security. Given recent events, it's kinda scary how accurate the many reactions to this world-ending crisis are to real life. I find this first cycle to be genius, because in a lot of ways it mirrors the game as a whole. While the area you're able to explore gets a lot larger after you regain your human form, the game still isn't very explicit when detailing your objective. The game will tell you to explore a certain region, but other than that you're pretty much on your own. Since there's only 4 main areas, it's pretty easy to nail down what you need to do, but it's still up to you to actually go there and talk to people to learn how to progress, which is doubly true with the game's countless side quests. While this game's structure might seem sort of obtuse at first, I think it does a great job of portraying the game's themes. You only get as much out of this adventure as you put into it, which I think is beautifully portrayed through the way the main quest and side objectives interact with one another. Majora's Mask has the potential to be one of the shorter Zelda games should you choose to just beeline the main quest. There's only 4 main areas you need to complete to reach the final boss. There's the Southern Swamp, Snowhead Mountains, the Great Bay, and Ikana Canyon. Each area is undergoing some unnatural phenomenon. The swamp, for example, is filled with poisoned water, and the Snowhead region is undergoing a constant blizzard in the middle of spring. The waters of Great Bay have become murky and hard to navigate, and Ikana has become overrun with the souls of the dead. The problems each area faces are representative of intense negative emotion. The Deku Scrubs in the swamp region are attempting to sacrifice a member of the monkey tribe, since they believe one of them kidnapped their princess, unwilling to listen to anything that suggests the contrary. The people of Snowhead are driven to intense sadness after the loss of their Goron warrior Darmani, and being driven indoors due to the blizzard. The Zora singer Lulu loses her voice after thieves steal her unhatched eggs, and you witness her lover die right in front of you while attempting and failing to retrieve said eggs. The entire Ikana Valley is a wasteland, previously ravaged by war, the only remains being the countless souls of the dead and a barren landscape. The various transformation masks you get to progress throughout the game are filled with this intense sense of regret. Darmani's spirit is unable to rest after his failure to stop the unnatural blizzard ailing his people. Mikau is unable to retrieve the eggs and save the person he loves from a deep depression. The Deku mask might seem like an outlier in this regard, since the Skull Kid curses you with it instead of obtaining it through the Song of Healing, but at the start of the game you can find this tree husk that looks shockingly similar to the Deku mask. At the end of the game it's implied it's the Deku butler's son, as we see him crying over it in solitude during the credits, so you could argue that the Deku mask embodies this regret of not being able to return home, to see his loved ones ever again. Majora's Mask on the whole is built on this intense feeling of melancholy and regret. Each region is dealing with a severe conflict, and even if they were to solve it, who's to say that it'll even matter with the moon falling and destroying everything anyway? Because of this, I think it's really impactful that you can only clear each area, and by extension the entire game, with the help of these tortured souls. To even gain access to these masks, you need to first play the Song of Healing for them, which reminds them of the things they hold dear and the things they accomplished in life, which helps them move on from their regret and pass on, entrusting their will onto Link in the form of a mask. Only then are you able to borrow their power, and it's only by combining it with your own and the knowledge you gain by talking to those around you that you're able to resolve each area's troubles. In terms of the areas themselves, I've always really liked that each area has essentially a mini-dungeon before the main ones. I guess this is kinda necessary since you need to spread out key items since there's so few real dungeons, but I think they do a lot to flesh out each area, and they end up acting as sort of a soft checkpoint if you need to reset a cycle for whatever reason. I've always enjoyed breaking into the Deku Palace, flying over all the guards to remain undetected to talk to the imprisoned monkey. Sneaking into the pirate fortress to steal back the Sora eggs is such a cool set piece even if you can cheese it with the stone mask. The bottom of the well and Ikana Castle segments are also really memorable. The well in particular does a good job of testing your game knowledge by requiring specific items to progress through each room, and it's funny getting the enemies to dance and stuff with the right mask while storming the castle itself. It's also given us the scariest thing in any game ever, which is just great. The main dungeons in each area have always been some of my favorites. They feel a lot more substantial and involved than most Zelda dungeons do, often having you jumping between multiple levels and feature more intricate puzzles, which are elevated through the limited time frame you have to complete each one. The stray fairies hidden in each dungeon add an extra incentive to explore each area completely, as some of them are pretty sneakily hidden, but it's worth it since the upgrades you get from them are all really good. It's honestly kinda hard to pick my favorite dungeon. It's probably a tie between the Snowhead and Stone Tower Temple. Snowhead Temple has this really cool vertical structure that requires you to strategically knock down this central pillar to progress, and the Stone Tower Temple has this really fun gimmick of flipping the entire dungeon upside down, on top of being a really good test of the game's systems and items since it's the last dungeon in the game. It could be that I'm just stupid, but these dungeons still manage to trip me up a bit even on my most recent playthrough. The bosses are pretty hit or miss. They range from sick as fuck to really annoying. Georg is one of my least favorite bosses in the entire series. Not because he's particularly difficult, but because the swimming controls in this game are kinda finicky, so having to jump in and out of the water to damage him can be more annoying than it should be. Odalawa is fine, pretty basic as far as Zelda bosses go, but that's okay considering he's the first boss in the game. The other two are really cool though. Goat is a boss that you have to chase down with the Goron mask while dodging his bombs and lightning attacks. It's really unique as far as Zelda bosses go. The Twin Mold boss is more of a set piece than anything. You use this giant's mask you get from the dungeon prior, and as the name suggests, you turn into a giant to demolish the two bosses. You can only use the mask in this arena. It's not the most complex boss in the world, but it's still really fun just stomping around and demolishing these two worm things. The spectacle alone makes it stand out in my mind. It's just so cool. The 4 dungeons, and by extension their areas, are really fun and expansive. I always look forward to going back to them whenever I replay this game. But would you believe me if I said they weren't even my favorite thing Majora's Mask has to offer? If you only do the 4 main dungeons and try to fight the final boss, you're gonna be pretty underpowered compared to most other Zelda games. You'd be stuck with a pitiful 7 hearts, and while the final boss is doable at that number with proper planning, you would probably be inclined to search for some more heart pieces just to be safe. And thankfully there's a lot of different side content on offer to meet that goal. In a lot of ways you could call the side content of Majora's Mask the real heart of the game. Not that the 4 main areas are particularly lacking in that regard, but the greater focus on the characters and the world in this game does a great job of highlighting and strengthening the game's themes. As I mentioned earlier, most of the characters have their own day-to-day schedules and routines, and a lot of them are tied to specific in-game events that can reward you with something as simple as an item to entire quest lines. Most side quests will reward you with different masks. Yeah, it took me long enough to talk about the mask aspect of Majora's Mask, don't judge me. These can vary in their usefulness. Some will give you unique properties, like being able to run faster, become invisible to enemies, or explode your face on command. Others will change the dialogue people give you, or allow you to talk to animals and gossip statues. Some will mostly act as mementos, and others will make you cry. The types of quests you partake in to obtain these masks vary drastically from mask to mask. Some are as simple as talking to a guy and hearing out his troubles, while others require you to take on a multi-day quest line that sees you doing a variety of things. For example, one sees you fighting off a group of aliens from stealing cows from the Romani Ranch, which then opens a second quest that sees you defending a milk delivery wagon from some bandits. The most intricate quest in this game has to be the Couples Mask quest, which takes place over the entire 3-day cycle and can even branch off at a couple points to reward you with different items. What makes the side content in this game stand out in my opinion isn't really the quests themselves, but more so that they give you an opportunity to interact with every facet of this world. More often than not, they give you a little insight into whatever a character is going through, on top of how the whole world ending thing is affecting them mentally. A lot of these quests are pretty short and simple all things considered, but they do a great job of humanizing the inhabitants of Termina and putting you into their headspace. One of my favorite examples of this is the wagon defense quest during the Romani Ranch questline. It starts as a simple wagon ride with the ranch head Cremia, who's a baddie by the way, and she passes the time by talking about how tough things have been in Termina recently. She has to take care of the ranch after her father's untimely passing, which is difficult with just her and her sister. Her best friend is supposed to get married the day of the time carnival, and she acknowledges the rumors about the moon falling and how it makes her feel uneasy about the whole thing. It's a small moment that's quickly interrupted by the emergence of a couple of thieves, but it's always really stuck with me. I really like that this game, that normally is about extreme time management and not letting a single moment go to waste, isn't afraid to take a moment to slow down every once in a while and delve into a character's thought process and emotions. It really helps sell the dire state Termina is currently in, and drives home that things don't go unnoticed by the greater population. And it's not a phenomenon exclusive to this quest either. There's countless moments throughout the game, especially on day 3, that showcase how different people are dealing with the world-ending threat. Whether it's arguing with their peers in the mayor's office, cowering in fear in a safe room, drinking themselves to the point they can pretend everything is alright, the game doesn't shy away from the severity of its premise, and it adds a lot to the overall impact of its message. Majora's Mask in a lot of ways is a game about death and sadness. Apart from the threat of the moon falling, it's a constant theme present throughout every area of the game. You talk to people who are directly affected by death, afraid of dying, who are dying or even have died many times throughout the game. I mean, hell, the name of the area you're in is Termina, for fuck's sake. There's even theories that Link himself is dead throughout the game, which I always found pretty interesting, not gonna lie. But to be honest, for me, the game has always represented something a little different. Not that I can't see where these people are coming from when they explore the game's themes through the lens of death and suffering. There's an awful lot in the game to support those interpretations, and it's fascinating to explore. But for me, the game has always done a better job at representing what it means to live instead. Majora's Mask can be an overwhelming game. It's a game that gives you an objective with very little in the way of direction, and expects you to complete said objectives with a fleeting 3-day time frame. Around every corner, you seem to stumble upon 1 or 2 more people that are suffering from all sorts of ailments. On top of that, pretty much anything you do in a cycle is undone once you inevitably run out of time and have to reset the cycle. Time and time again, you're forced to see the same people constantly suffering, and while you can help them out in the moment, it's only a fleeting relief. There's countless people around Termina that could use your help, but you just don't have the time to save everyone. Regardless of how well you manage your time, inevitably someone is going to slip through the cracks. What's the point of helping them if it's just going to get undone at the end of the cycle anyway? Why run myself ragged helping these people if it's inevitably going to get undone? What's the point of doing anything for that matter? Why even try to help people? Why explore the temples? Why bother if everything I do doesn't help anybody in the long run? In a lot of ways, it might just be easier to do nothing. It's easier to run away, to sit there and let the moon fall and let the world fall into a deep, deafening silence. But that wouldn't be very fun, now would it? It's easy to get caught up in the permanence of your actions. But even when you inevitably have to turn back the clock, there's always going to be one thing your actions are guaranteed to have changed. You. The person you helped might not remember what you did for them, but you do, and that experience has been etched into your brain and into your soul. This is represented by the different masks in-game. They represent the experience of helping out the person with their troubles, and learning something from them in the process. Some masks might be more useful than others in your day-to-day journey, but regardless of utility, they all act as a reminder of what you went through while helping that person. A reminder of the happiness you brought them, even if fleeting. And really, isn't that what life is at the end of the day? It's the combination of all of the little experiences that shape us into who we are as people. Link is just one person. We're all just one person. But while we all might be lacking as individuals, we grow and learn through our experiences with others. It might be hard for one person to change the world by themselves, but you can change your world, change the world of those around you. And little by little, those one-off experiences can coalesce into something greater, and will help you learn how to deal with other hard situations in the future. Your actions, your words, your experiences can inspire others to take actions that end up spreading and influencing even further change. And honestly, I think that's just as powerful.